I bought you that house. I worked my whole life to give you something better. But when you told me not to come to Thanksgiving, something inside me broke. I never expected it to end like this. I thought to myself as I sat there in my empty living room, the silence almost deafening. I stared at the phone in my hand, the words still echoing in my mind. Thanks for the house, Dad. But don't come to Thanksgiving. David's voice, cold and distant, rang in my ears like a slap. It didn't make sense. This wasn't the son I had raised. This wasn't the boy who used to run to me with open arms, calling me Dad with a love so pure, it could fill any room. But now, he wanted me gone. Out of his life. Out of his Thanksgiving dinner. I never imagined this would be how my story with my son would end. And yet, here I was. I had given him everything. The house, the security, the comfort to start his life, but it wasn't enough. The worst part? I still didn't know what had changed. What happened to the warmth, the connection? The love I thought was unbreakable had crumbled in an instant. I could still remember the day I handed him the keys to that house. His smile, so wide, so genuine. I thought it was all worth it, every sacrifice, every late night, every exhausting hour spent building something for his future. He said, "Thanks, Dad," and that was supposed to be enough. But it wasn't. Somewhere along the way, I had become invisible. I didn't even realize it was happening. It was little things at first. He stopped calling as much. The visits became shorter. The conversations, once filled with laughter, turned into brief exchanges of pleasantries. I thought it was just the stress of life. But now, looking back, it was clear. It wasn't just life getting in the way. It was me. I was the one getting in the way. Maybe he thought I was just a burden. Maybe he thought I was holding him back. After all, I wasn't the same man I once was. I had grown older. I didn't have the same energy. The same drive. But that's no excuse. I didn't deserve to be cast aside. I had worked hard to give him everything he had. And I deserved better than this. But when I called him to talk about it, all I got was silence. It was as if I didn't even exist anymore. I waited for the holidays. I waited for Thanksgiving, thinking maybe things would go back to normal. Maybe it was just a phase. Maybe he was just busy. But when the invitation didn't come, and I heard the words from his mouth, I knew it wasn't just a phase. This was the end. The family I had worked my whole life for, the family I had sacrificed everything for, was slipping away from me. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop it. The house I bought him had become a symbol of everything I had lost. What was supposed to bring us closer had driven us apart. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but I had to face it. He had changed. And I had to change too. I didn't need him to validate me. I didn't need his approval anymore. I had spent too many years trying to be the father he wanted, the man he needed. But now, I realized I had to be the man I needed. I had to walk away. It was time to let go. It was time to stop fighting for a relationship that wasn't there anymore. As I sat there, feeling the weight of those words, I realized something important. I had spent my whole life giving. But now, it was time for me to take back what was mine. My dignity. My peace. My life. The house was empty now. The silence was overwhelming, but it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of loss. I sat in the same chair where I'd shared so many dinners, so many conversations, but now, it felt like a ghost of the past. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter, the sounds of my children running around, the clatter of plates and glasses as we gathered around the table. But those days were long gone. The house I had bought for them, the house I had worked my entire life to provide, felt like a stranger's house now. There was nothing left here for me. I had poured everything into this family, sacrificed everything to make sure they had everything they needed. And for what? So they could push me aside when I was no longer useful to them. The anger that had been building inside me now began to surface. It wasn't just the words David had spoken that hurt me. It wasn't just the fact that I was being cast aside like an unwanted object. It was everything. It was the years of being taken for granted. The years of watching my own children grow distant, watching them form their own lives and families, while I was left behind in the background. I had always believed that family was the one thing that could never change. No matter how hard things got, no matter how difficult life became, family was supposed to stick together. But that belief had been shattered. I thought buying the house would bring us closer. I thought it would be the thing that kept us united. I had spent so many years working, saving, sacrificing, just to make sure they had the security they needed. But in the end, all it did was create a wedge between us. I remembered when I gave David the keys to the house. He looked at me, his eyes filled with gratitude. He said, "Thanks, Dad, this means the world to me." I thought that was enough. I thought that was all I needed to hear. But now, I realized it was just words. Empty words. Words that meant nothing once the house was no longer a means to an end. Now, it was just a symbol of everything I had lost. I wanted to believe that I was overreacting, that maybe I was just being sensitive. But deep down, I knew the truth. They didn't need me anymore. They had moved on without me. And I was left standing there, holding on to the past while they moved forward into their futures. I hadn't been invited to Thanksgiving, and I knew there was no going back from that. The wound had been opened, and there was no way to close it. It was time for me to face the reality of the situation. I wasn't part of their lives anymore. I was just a relic from a past they no longer cared about. But I wasn't going to sit here and wallow in self-pity. I wasn't going to beg for their love and attention. It was time to take control of my own life. For years, I had put their needs ahead of my own. I had been the provider, the caretaker, the one who was always there for them, no matter what. But now, I realized that it was time to take care of myself. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love. I had my own dignity, my own peace to reclaim. I had given everything I had to them, but now it was time to take something back. It was time to let go of the past and move forward. It was time to stop living for them and start living for myself. The days after Thanksgiving felt like a heavy fog. The house was quieter than it had ever been. I sat in the same chair where I had once greeted David with pride, where I had shared countless family dinners, and now it felt like I was a stranger in my own home. The walls that had once echoed with laughter now seemed to mock me with their emptiness. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost everything, but at the same time, I knew I was the one who had to change. I could no longer stay stuck in the past, waiting for someone who had no intention of being there for me. I knew I had to leave this place. Not because it wasn't mine, but because it wasn't my home anymore. I had spent so much of my life giving to my family, to David, to his mother, to his children, but somewhere along the way, I had stopped giving to myself. The bitterness that had begun to settle in my chest was a reminder of how far I had fallen. But more than that, it was a reminder of how much I had allowed myself to be overlooked. I walked through the rooms of the house, touching the furniture that I had carefully picked out, running my fingers along the walls that I had painted, each corner a memory. And yet, none of it mattered now. I had bought that house to give David a better life, a fresh start, but it had turned into nothing more than a reminder of my failure. I couldn't help but think back to the moment I gave him the keys. I had been so proud of that day. I had worked hard to provide everything he could ever need. But the gratitude I thought I would get was never there. I had been blinded by my own pride, convinced that by giving him what he needed, I could ensure that he would always be there for me. But now, all I had left was a house, an empty house, and a broken heart. I knew it wasn't just about the house. It was about the years I had spent sacrificing my own happiness, my own peace, just to make sure they were happy. And now that I wasn't needed, I was left with nothing. I couldn't remember the last time David had called to check on me, or when he had asked how I was doing. The distance had been growing between us for years, but I had been too caught up in my own world to see it. I had been so focused on providing for them, on making sure they had what they needed, that I had forgotten about myself. Now, as I stood in the middle of the living room, I realized that it was time to stop pretending. I couldn't keep living in the past, waiting for things to change. They weren't going to change. David wasn't going to change. And neither was I. I had spent too long trying to be someone I wasn't, trying to be the father, the husband, the provider, when all I really needed to be was myself. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love. I needed to take care of myself. It wasn't easy to admit, but it was the truth. I had to let go of the dream of a perfect family. I had to let go of the idea that everything I had done was for nothing. It wasn't. It just wasn't for them. It was for me. And now, I had to find a way to make peace with that. I had to stop measuring my worth by their expectations. I had to stop defining myself by my role in their lives. I wasn't just their father, their husband, their provider. I was Robert, and that was enough. I wasn't perfect, but I had done the best I could. And it was time to start living for me. I left the house that day. Not because it was too painful to stay, but because I was no longer willing to let it define me. I didn't need to be in that house to be happy. I didn't need to wait for their approval to find peace. I didn't need them to tell me I was enough. I already knew it. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew I had to walk away from the life I had built around them. It was time to start over, to create a life that was just mine. It had been a few weeks since I left the house. The world outside felt different, like I had stepped into a new chapter of my life. But it wasn't easy. The loneliness that had been creeping up on me before, that quiet emptiness, had only gotten worse. I tried to distract myself, kept myself busy with the small things. I walked around the neighborhood, sat in the park, went to the local diner and had coffee, but the silence never really left me. It followed me, like a shadow, reminding me of everything I had lost. It was strange, not hearing the noise of the house anymore, not seeing David walk through the door, not hearing the familiar sounds of family life. But I had to admit, it was also a relief. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. For the first time in years, I wasn't living for anyone else. I wasn't trying to make everyone else happy. I wasn't trying to be the man they wanted me to be. I was just me. And that was enough. I spent a lot of time reflecting. I thought about the years I had spent giving, and giving. I thought about how much I had sacrificed for them. The countless hours at work, the nights spent worrying, the years spent building a life for them. And yet, when it came down to it, none of that mattered. None of it was enough. I wasn't enough. That's what it felt like. I wasn't enough for them. But I was enough for myself. And that realization hit me hard. It wasn't their approval that I needed. It wasn't their love that I needed. It was my own. For so long, I had been living in their shadow, doing everything I could to make them proud, to keep them happy. But in doing so, I had lost myself. I had forgotten who I was. I had become nothing more than a provider, a father, a husband. But not anymore. I had let go of that, let go of the roles I had clung to for so long. I wasn't their father anymore. I wasn't their provider. I was Robert. Just Robert. And that was enough. It wasn't easy to let go of the idea that my family was everything. But I knew it was necessary. They weren't the family I thought they were. They were not the family I had worked so hard for. I had given them everything, but they had taken it without a second thought. And now, it was time to take it back. I had to learn to stand on my own 2 feet again. I had to find my own way, even if it meant walking away from them. The hardest part was accepting that I couldn't change them. I couldn't fix what was broken. I couldn't make them love me the way I wanted them to. But I could love myself. I could take care of myself. And that was the most important thing. I didn't need them to define me anymore. I didn't need their approval. I had my own life to live now. I wasn't going to waste it waiting for their love. I wasn't going to sit around hoping things would go back to the way they were. Because they wouldn't. Things had changed, and I had changed. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally free. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew it was mine. I had taken the first step towards reclaiming my life, and there was no going back. I wasn't going to let them hold me back anymore. I wasn't going to let anyone hold me back. I was going to live for me. It had been a month since I made the decision to leave the house behind. I had settled into a small apartment, one that felt far less like a home than the place I had left, but it was mine. It was the first time in years that I had lived for myself, and I couldn't deny that there was a strange sense of freedom in it. But the loneliness? That was another story. I had spent so much of my life focused on providing for others, making sure their lives were comfortable, that I had neglected my own needs. Now that I had everything to myself, I was left with the echo of silence. The apartment was small, but it was quiet. The kind of quiet that felt like a constant reminder of the life I had lost. It wasn't the chaos of family meals or the hustle of kids running around, but it wasn't necessarily peaceful either. The quiet was suffocating in its own way. As I sat there, looking out the window at the busy street below, I realized how much I had taken for granted. I had lived my whole life making sure everyone else was happy, and now I was left wondering what happiness even looked like for me. I didn't know who I was without my family. I didn't know who I was without being needed. But as the days passed, I began to understand something important. I didn't need them to define me. I didn't need their approval to feel good about myself. It had taken me this long to figure it out, but I had spent years looking for validation in the wrong places. I had always thought that if I gave enough, if I worked hard enough, if I provided everything they needed, it would be enough to earn their love and respect. But I had been wrong. Love shouldn't have to be earned. It should just be. And that's something I had never fully understood until now. I wasn't just their father, their provider, their protector. I was Robert, a man with my own worth, my own purpose, my own future. It was time for me to stop living for others and start living for myself. I wasn't going to wait for David to change. I wasn't going to sit around hoping he would come to his senses. The truth was, I couldn't keep waiting for people who didn't appreciate me. I had done my best. I had given everything, and it wasn't enough. But that didn't mean I wasn't enough. It just meant that I had to let go of the expectations I had for them and for myself. It was time to stop holding on to a family that had already let me go. It was time to find my own path, one that didn't depend on their approval. I spent the next few weeks cleaning up my life in ways I hadn't expected. It wasn't just about leaving the house. It was about leaving behind the idea that I had to be something I wasn't. I had to forgive myself for the years I had spent trying to live up to their expectations. I had to forgive myself for not being enough in their eyes. But more than that, I had to forgive myself for believing that I wasn't enough for me. As the days turned into weeks, I began to find a sense of peace in the quiet. It wasn't the kind of peace I had expected, the kind that comes from having everything figured out. But it was a peace that came from knowing that I had done my best, and that I was okay just as I was. I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need their approval. I was enough. And that was all that mattered. The weeks that followed felt like a blur, each day blending into the next. I spent more time in my small apartment, sitting in silence, trying to find some sense of normalcy. But I had to admit, it was hard. The loneliness was deafening at times. I thought I was prepared for it, but nothing could have prepared me for the quiet, the kind that creeps in and fills every empty space. I would wake up in the mornings and find myself staring at the walls, wondering what to do with myself. There was no work to rush to, no family to care for, just me. And the weight of the silence. But slowly, something started to shift within me. It wasn't immediate, it wasn't easy, but I began to realize something important. I didn't need to fill the silence with noise. I didn't need to surround myself with people to feel validated. For the first time in a long while, I didn't have to be anything for anyone else. I could just be me. And that was enough. It was a strange feeling, realizing that I didn't have to answer to anyone. No one was waiting for me to fix their problems, no one was depending on me to make their lives easier. It was all up to me now. I could do whatever I wanted. I could be whoever I wanted to be. The freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. I had spent so many years living for other people that I had lost touch with who I really was. But now, I had the chance to figure that out. I didn't need to be the perfect father, the perfect husband, the perfect provider anymore. I could just be Robert. It was funny, I hadn't realized how much of myself I had given away until now. I had spent so many years trying to be everything for everyone else that I had forgotten what it was like to take care of myself. I hadn't even realized how much I had sacrificed until I was alone, sitting in this apartment, with nothing but my thoughts. But now, as the days passed, I began to feel a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the peace I had expected, the kind that comes from having everything figured out. No, this was different. It was the kind of peace that comes from knowing you've done your best and that's all you can do. I had spent so many years trying to control everything, trying to fix everything, trying to make everyone happy. But now, I was learning to let go of that. I didn't have to fix anyone. I didn't have to be perfect. I could just be myself. It was a hard lesson to learn, but it was one I needed. I had spent too much time worrying about what others thought of me, worrying about their expectations, and it had worn me down. I had lost myself in the process. But now, I was starting to find myself again. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when the loneliness crept in, when I missed the family I thought I had. But I knew I couldn't go back to that life. I couldn't go back to the person I had been. The person who gave everything but never received anything in return. I wasn't that man anymore. I had learned that I was enough. Just as I was. And that was all I needed to know. It had been a while since I had made that decision to leave everything behind, and yet, every morning when I woke up in my small apartment, it felt like the first day of the rest of my life. The quiet was no longer suffocating. It was just the way things were. Now. It was the only way I could find peace. I didn't have to prove anything to anyone anymore. I didn't have to fill anyone's expectations or live up to the person they wanted me to be. I could be myself. And it felt freeing, even if it was hard to admit. The pain of being discarded, of being told to leave, didn't go away overnight. It still lingered, especially in moments of weakness, when the silence felt too loud or the memories of family dinners would come rushing back. But slowly, I was learning to live with it. I had been so caught up in what I had lost that I hadn't realized how much I had gained. I had gained the freedom to be me. I had gained the chance to find my own happiness, without depending on anyone else to make it happen. I wasn't just a father anymore. I wasn't just a provider or a husband. I was Robert, and that was all I needed to be. I spent my days doing things I had never had the chance to do before. I took walks in the park, visited local museums, read books I had always wanted to read. There was a sense of peace in these small things, a quiet joy that I had never known existed. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for someone to tell me what to do, what was expected of me. It was a strange kind of joy, the kind that comes when you're not trying to fill anyone else's shoes, when you're not worried about what anyone else thinks. And the funny thing was, no one seemed to notice. No one seemed to care that I was no longer part of their lives. The world went on without me, and that was okay. In fact, it was more than okay. It was a relief. I didn't have to pretend to be the perfect father, the perfect man. I didn't have to give everything I had just to get a little bit of affection or approval in return. I could just live. I could just be. And that was more than enough. But even as I started to feel this peace, there were moments when the old wounds would open up again. I would think of David, of his smile, of the way he had looked at me when he was a child, full of love and trust. And I would wonder where that love had gone. I would think of the house, the one I had bought for him, the one I had worked so hard to make perfect, and I would wonder if he ever thought about it, if he ever thought about me. But the answer was always the same: it didn't matter anymore. It didn't matter because I wasn't waiting for him to come back. I wasn't waiting for his approval. I had learned to live without it. And that was a lesson I was slowly starting to accept. I didn't need his love to feel whole. I didn't need his approval to feel valued. I was Robert. And I was enough. The days passed, and with each one, I felt more and more like the person I had once been before I had lost myself in the roles of husband and father. I had been so focused on making others happy that I had forgotten what it meant to make myself happy. But now, I was learning. I was learning that happiness didn't come from what you gave to others, but from what you gave to yourself. And I was finally starting to give to myself. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was worth it. I had spent so much time living for others, but now, it was time to live for me. It had been months since I moved out, and each day felt like a new step forward, but it also brought its own challenges. I had never expected life to be easy after everything that had happened, but I didn't expect it to be this complicated either. Some days, I woke up and felt like I had everything figured out. I'd find my rhythm again, do the things I wanted to do, live the life I had put off for so long. But other days, the loneliness crept back in, like an old friend, reminding me of the family I once had. I had moments where I questioned if I had made the right decision. I thought about David, about the good times we had shared before things changed. I thought about the years I spent raising him, providing for him, giving him everything I could, only to be cast aside in the end. The question still lingered. Was I wrong to expect more from him? Was I wrong to think that all my sacrifices would amount to something? But I had to remind myself that it wasn't about them anymore. It wasn't about David or anyone else. It was about me. It had to be. I had spent so much of my life living for others, trying to make them happy, trying to be the perfect father, the perfect husband, and in doing so, I had forgotten what it meant to take care of myself. I had spent so much of my life thinking I had to earn love, thinking I had to prove myself to be worthy of their affection. But now, in this quiet space, I was learning that I didn't have to prove anything. I didn't have to earn anyone's love. I didn't need anyone's approval to feel whole. For the first time in a long time, I was learning to live for myself. It was a slow process, and it wasn't always easy. There were days when I felt like I had made a huge mistake. I missed the family dinners, the laughter, the feeling of being needed. I missed David's smile, the way he used to look at me with pride. But then I reminded myself that I wasn't living for them anymore. I wasn't living for their approval. I was living for me. I had to make peace with the fact that I couldn't change what had happened. I couldn't change David's actions. I couldn't change the way things had turned out. But I could change how I viewed it. I could change how I moved forward. And that was where my peace began. I started to focus on the things that made me feel good. I took up hobbies I had neglected for years, like painting, reading, and even trying new recipes. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't rushing to take care of everyone else. I was taking care of myself. I was learning what it meant to find joy in the little things again. The joy of sitting in the park, reading a book, or simply enjoying a cup of coffee in the morning without feeling like I had to rush to be somewhere. I was learning to appreciate the quiet moments, the moments where I could just be myself. And it was enough. Slowly but surely, I started to feel like I was healing. I wasn't the same person I had been before, but I was okay with that. I wasn't the father David expected me to be, the husband I once was, but I was still Robert, and that was enough. I had learned that I didn't need to be anything else. I didn't need to be what anyone else wanted me to be. I had spent so long living for other people that I had forgotten who I was. But now, I was starting to find myself again. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. The days were getting easier, and the loneliness wasn't as deafening as it once was. I still had moments of doubt, moments when I thought about everything I had lost, but I was learning to let go. I was learning to live for myself. And that was something I had never done before. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew that for the first time in a long time, I was on the right path. The path that was just mine. The months that followed felt like a blur, the days and nights blending into one another. I had finally let go of the idea that I could fix everything. I had stopped waiting for someone to come back into my life and make things right. Instead, I was learning to make things right for myself. It wasn't easy, not by any means, but it was necessary. For the first time in a long time, I was doing things for me. I didn't have to explain myself to anyone, I didn't have to make anyone happy, and that in itself was a relief. There were moments when I still thought about David, about his absence in my life, about what could have been. But there were fewer of those moments now. I was starting to embrace the present, starting to understand that the past was just that, the past. The future was mine to shape, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had the power to do so. I started to meet new people, to make new connections. Nothing too deep, but enough to remind me that I wasn't invisible, that there was still a world outside of the pain I had felt for so long. I joined a local book club, attended community events, and even began volunteering at a shelter once a week. These small steps were enough to break the isolation that had once consumed me. Each new person I met, each new experience I had, reminded me that life still had so much to offer. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I had stopped living for the approval of others, and in doing so, I had begun to live for myself. I didn't need their love to feel validated anymore. I didn't need David or anyone else to tell me that I was enough. I had found that within myself. One day, I sat in a park, watching the people pass by, and realized that I had finally reached a place of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace I had once imagined, the kind that comes when everything is perfect, when everything is how you want it to be. No, this peace was different. It was a quiet acceptance of who I was, of where I was in life, and of the fact that I didn't need anyone else to complete me. I had spent so many years trying to be everything for everyone else, but now, I was learning to just be. Just be Robert. And that was enough. I had my ups and downs, of course. There were still days when I felt the sting of rejection, when I missed the family I once had, but those days were fewer. And more often than not, they were followed by moments of realization. Realizing that I didn't have to carry the weight of their expectations anymore. Realizing that I could create my own happiness, regardless of whether or not they ever came back into my life. I had let go of the hope that things would go back to the way they were. I had let go of the belief that I could fix everything. I had accepted that things were different now, and that was okay. I wasn't the same man I had been when I first bought that house for David. I wasn't the same man who had been desperate for his approval, for his love. But I was better. I had learned to live for myself. I had learned that love wasn't something you had to earn, that respect wasn't something you had to beg for. It was something you gave yourself first. And with that realization, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I didn't need to wait for anyone else to tell me I was enough. I had already figured it out on my own. The days grew easier. The loneliness that had once consumed me no longer felt like a prison. I had my own life, my own path, and that was all I needed. I had learned to love myself, to forgive myself, and to embrace the life I had built. And for the first time in years, I was truly free. Free from the chains of expectation, free from the weight of trying to please everyone, free to live my life the way I wanted to. I had learned that I was enough. And that, more than anything, was the greatest gift I could give myself.